Hello everyone, welcome to tonight. We did have quite a lot of registrations. We had about 116, but it looks like people may have talked online to us and felt that they don't want to come. So we will start, even though people might come in a bit late, if that's okay. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the Mayor of Ku-ring-gai, Councillor Sam Knight.
I don't think anyone's ever clapped for me before, so that's interesting. So welcome everyone. It's great to see you all here to our first tree forum, the first of many. We know that the management of trees, the preservation of trees is something that's very important to a lot of Ku-ring-gai residents. When I looked at our 116 registrations, I had the opportunity to look through all the comments. I didn't actually read through all 116. I just copy and pasted the whole thing, stuck it in some AI and spat out the outcome. But what was clear was that there were certain keywords that popped up over and over again. Tree, illegal, remove full, development. Those words popped up again and again and again and again. And so did the word council. Those were the top 5 words. But outside of the top 5 words, there were other glimmers of hope. There were words like community, there were words like benefit, climate, wildlife, education. And those are things that we really want to focus on in this tree forum today. Before I forget, I'd like to introduce you to the other councillors who are here today as well. So we've got our Deputy Mayor, Christine Kay, and then in this front row from left to right, we've got Councillor Greg Taylor, we've got Councillor Simon Lennon, Councillor Kim Wheatley, Councillor Martin Smith, Councillor Alec Taylor and Councillor Barbara Ward. And my understanding is that the other councillors may be coming soon as well. They may just be a bit late. So it's fantastic to see so much engagement by councillors as well. Now, we all know that trees is a challenge, right? State law limits how much or how far council can go. When you've got fines of $3,000 for individuals, $6,000 for companies, to me it seems more like a fee rather than a fine. Now, council has explored other ways or other deterrents, which we will share about soon. And there's a lot to discuss, but it's not just about what council has done. Tonight is also about your ideas as residents. We want to listen to you. We want everyone to have a chat to each other. We want to really work together to solve this issue. And just going back to my intro, it's not really just about punishing people. It's really about education, making the community aware of the benefits of having trees around us. I guess my final comment is we will aspire to do all these kinds of things, but it's also in a backdrop or a context where we know that there are housing policy changes that may be coming very soon. In April, there will be housing policy changes which say within 400 metres of a train station, deep soil planning of 7%. That's not very much when you're aspiring for 40% urban tree canopy across Greater Sydney. Later on, when we have another set of changes in June or July, they've got targets of 15, 20, 25, 30% urban tree canopy, but that's just not enough for us to build a climate resilient Ku-ring-gai. So thank you, all of you. Over 100 people registered, a lot of very passionate people here. I look forward to the discussions that we have together, and let's work together. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Knight, for the welcome. I'm David Marshall, I'm the Acting General Manager, and thank you all for coming along tonight. We're very aware of how important trees are to the environment and the community, and we know that our councillors as well are very concerned about tree loss, and there's been a number of council resolutions about tree protection in recent times, including a resolution to hold this very tree forum. And I also know that our staff, and there's quite a few staff here tonight, also care very much and work hard to protect and enhance the tree canopy. So tonight we want to provide you with some information to clarify how we manage our trees, and we aim to be open and transparent with you about that. But importantly, we also want to hear from you, answer your questions and get your ideas. That's really what tonight's all about. As the Mayor mentioned, despite their many benefits, we all know that trees facing increasing pressure in our area. There's threats from urban development, housing, threats from risk management activities for both perceived and actual risks, threats from infrastructure, planning policies and bushfire protection legislation. We've done some things in recent times to combat the illegal tree removal. That includes lobbying to impose greater penalties. We've developed an online map for the community to identify trees that have been approved for removal. We've implemented a requirement for the display of tree permits, and we've also run a community education campaign. And throughout the evening, we'll talk about a number of other measures that we've either introduced or we're planning to. Council plays a significant role in tree management, as do the community, and we need to work together, share information and ensure we get the balance right in order to protect our canopy and, importantly, reduce illegal tree removal. We'd also like to show some support to residents to increase vegetation in their own properties, and as a really small gesture to you, we do have a selection of plants at the back of the room that you're welcome to take home. And they're native species that were propagated at our nursery by volunteers, so thank you for that. So thank you again for coming along to discuss the issue. And I'll now hand you over to Virginia Leaf, our Manager Corporate Communications, who will facilitate the evening. Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight we're going to have 3 presentations from staff. Should take about half an hour, and then we'll have plenty of time for you to engage with us. So that's what we want to do mostly. But we do also just want to give you some information, because you may have questions that we can answer via our presentations. Now, I know a lot of you put in work when you registered online, and we will, over the next couple of weeks, put those questions online and provide answers. But as I said, there was 116, so it's quite a lot. So we will do it over the next couple of weeks. Also, we are recording tonight, so that should be on the website tomorrow, along with the presentation. So tell your friends, if they couldn't make it, that they haven't missed out on anything. So tonight, it's important that we're all respectful to each other. We know trees are a very passionate issue, and we really do want to hear what everyone's got to say, but in a respectful way. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter.
Thanks, Virginia. My name's Ian Francis. I'm the team leader of development of the landscape assessment and ecological assessment team within our development area. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, well, legitimate, hopefully, tree removals and hopefully give you some insight into the amount of effort we put into trying to keep trees within development sites that we're able to assess. Firstly, I'm going to talk a little bit about some the exemptions which occur through various avenues which allow residents to remove trees without development consent or consent of council through permit. Firstly, there is what's called the Exempt and Compliant Development Code, or SEP, which is a state environmental planning policy. It does allow for development to proceed without council assessment, and within that development there are provisions for removal of trees within 3 metres of dwellings that are up to 8 metres in height, and also vegetation generally to do with compliant development of 6 metres in height and less. So there are trees that will be removed in complying development sites, and there are lots of those which can be removed legitimately. And that's quite common. We don't see those at all. there are, this came in some years ago, provisions under the Rural Fire Act for removal of vegetation in bushfire affected areas for bushfire management, and that's under what's called the 1050 legislation. And again, not an issue that council has any influence over. Certain properties are able to undertake clearing under that legislation, and it's there's a website where people can look up whether their site is able to, they're able to take advantage of that. And there are a lot of trees removed some years ago due to that legislation. It's not an ideal, it's not a merit assessment. It's basically based on the proximity of vegetation to a dwelling. Other types of removals might occur which don't require a consent, can be land and environment court orders under the neighbour disputes, trees and neighbours dispute legislation, where two neighbours can't agree about a tree that might be causing some problems, such as damage to a property, could be dangerous potentially. The court makes a decision on that, has a hearing, a one-day hearing. That may result in no removal, it may result in some pruning, it may result in full removal of a tree. It's fairly rare. The other exemption is under our development control plan in terms of some weed and nuisance species that don't require consent of council for removal. And there are also some weed species that are able to be removed under state government legislation as well. It's equivalent of what was called the Noxious Weed Act, became a different legislation. So there are quite a few avenues of where trees can be removed without consent of council, and that's the way the legislation works. In relation to development, which is what we have a team within our planning department that looks at landscape assessment, tree assessment and ecological assessment. Have an ecological assessment officer and a number of landscape officers, of which I'm one. We look at development applications where there are impacts to trees or where they're within mapped biodiversity areas, riparian areas, that sort of thing. Development does involve tree removal. It's just a fact of life. The footprints of development now is much larger than historically it has been, even in the big properties that Ku-ring-gai has. And one reason why we've got a lot of trees is because they are big properties and they haven't been fully developed, and they can be developed to a larger extent now under the controls that enable that. But nonetheless, what we try to do is to minimise the impacts, to amend plans to minimise tree removal, and we assess the trees on a number of criteria. There is an Australian standard in relation to tree impacts which we use, and also we look at tree health, structural stability of the trees, whether they're, or the species, whether they're in good vigour, whether they have any heritage value, heritage conservation areas, particularly obviously, and heritage items add another layer to this. And by doing that, we try to determine what's the most significant vegetation on a property and try to work to ensure that that vegetation is retained. We have an ecological assessment officer that also looks at that aspect of trees and vegetation in general. And we work with our planners and our engineers and other professionals to get a really as best an outcome as we can, given the pressures that we're dealing with in terms of development. So that's a little bit about my team. There's a note, there's no net loss of biodiversity. That's our ecological officer may be looking at areas such as riparian areas, those sorts of things, where there may be vegetation management plans or replanting required. We ask for tree replenishment as part of our conditions of consent related to our development control plans, and also usually if it's a development of a new dwelling or above, there's always a landscape plan, and that plan will have tree planting. If the tree planting is not suitable, we will pick that up and we will change it as part of conditions of consent to try to get a better outcome. More trees or different species that are more suitable for the location. So we're looking at in quite a lot of detail to try to get a good outcome. Sometimes developments are refused, and quite often developments are refused which include issues to do with tree impacts and removal. More often tree impacts. There's numerous ways that development and construction impacts trees, and we're really well experienced in knowing what can happen, and if we're not satisfied, then it may be that the development is refused. If developments are refused, though, they can be reviewed by the Land and Environment Court, and therefore what our reasons for refusal need to be very strong. So we're looking at really substantial impacts to vegetation, which is important. Minor impacts to small exotic trees is not going to really cut it in the Land and Environment Court, so it has to be substantial. But Ku-ring-gai is full of substantial trees, so that's a very common issue for us in terms of reasons why we may not be satisfied with a development. Fortunately, we're able to, well, hopefully, get solutions which both keep trees and also give the applicant what they're wanting within reason, and that's what we're working to do. So that's a really quick overview of my team and our involvement. We really look at things in detail. We may even want people to do inspections of trees, aerial inspections of trees to determine whether there's decay, look at root mapping to see where major roots might be severed during excavation, and then look at amending things to ensure that that doesn't happen. So we're heavily involved, but of course we're not involved in everything. The compliant development we don't see, and there's often problems with compliant development, and I think you'll hear a little bit about that further in the presentation. So I'd like to thank you, and I'll hand it over now to another presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Michael Majosic. I'm the Director of Development and Regulation, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about something new the Council has embarked upon. It's a new initiative, and I believe from our understanding it's not something that has been introduced in other council areas, so it's a bit of a first. And so it was introduced in December of last year, so it's quite new. And really the reason for it was we had a situation where, as everyone here would appreciate, trees were being cut down unlawfully. There was a lot of frustration among the community and as well as among council officers and councillors about what could be done in response to that. And so up until recently, someone would cut down a tree illegally, they'd cop a fine. If it was an individual, it would be $3,000. A company would be $6,000, and they'd move on. So we decided that we'd introduce something that was a bit more substantial than that. And so essentially what this is, it's a tree replacement orders. So what happens is we use the order provisions under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. And so that's statutory, that has statutory weight behind it, to require the replacement of illegally removed trees. And so essentially what an order is actually puts the owner of the property under the obligation of not only replacing the tree or trees that have been lost, but also nurturing those trees into adulthood, which is something quite new. And the orders provisions actually force them to do that. So, like I said, it places an ongoing obligation on the owner of the property to maintain the tree up until maturity. And essentially the way that the process works is once an unlawful tree removal is detected and reported to council officers, it's investigated, and if it's established that it is legitimate, then our compliance officers and our landscape officers become involved. The removal may also require the issuing of a stop work order, and in some cases that's been the case, where the removal of the tree or trees has actually created an unsafe situation, either for trees or for individuals on site working. The landscape and tree assessment officer will then establish, based on trees that have been removed, what is the appropriate replacement tree or trees, the location of those trees, the species of those trees. And then a notice of proposed order will be issued, which is a due process that is allowed for under the legislation, which gives the owner the ability to give reasons to council as to why the order should not be made. Council must consider that, and then council will determine, based on that, whether to issue or not issue the order. Invariably, in most cases, the order is proceeded with. And so, as I said, replacement should be of appropriate locally endemic species in most cases. Some cases you'll have exceptions where it's a heritage context and the planting isn't of a native stock, but should be consistent with the historical theme. The interesting and I think desirable component of this tree replacement order process is that it requires follow-up. So without follow-up, we could issue orders and nothing would happen. And so the follow-up basically requires the assessing officers or the compliance officers to go back to the site on several occasions over the course of time to establish whether or not the trees that have been planted in response to the order are still alive, are still being maintained, are still thriving. And if that is not the case, council can then issue further fines. Council can then insist on the planting of another tree or trees in compliance with that order. So the business is not finished until such time as the tree successfully reaches adulthood, and that's when the order is satisfied. And another interesting feature of this tree replacement order process is that it goes with the land. So it transfers the obligation from the owner that actually allowed or caused the removal of the trees onto a subsequent owner or a successive owner, because the order actually attaches to the land and it's discoverable as part of the pre-sale conveyancing inquiry process under section 735A of the Local Government Act. So if I'm intending to buy a property, I'm doing my conveyancing, I will ask my solicitor to look into whether or not there are any outstanding orders on the property that I should be aware of that I don't necessarily want, that could actually dissuade me from purchasing that property. Some of them could be quite serious. Demolition orders, for instance, and costly. But what this does is it transfers that responsibility of complying with the order onto successive property owners. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Like, I know you might have questions now, but we're going to have another 2 presentations. They'll be short, 10 minutes each, and then you can ask questions. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Greg Narker and I'm the Coordinator of Tree Management. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do and some of the legislation that drives what we do, and also talk about some of the challenges that are involved in dealing with unauthorised tree work, and then some of the things that we're doing to try and deal with those issues. So what do? We deal with a number of different things. We deal with private tree applications, we deal with council tree requests, we deal with arboricultural impact assessments for council projects, so that's impacts on council trees and developing procedures and processes and conditions to try and minimise the impacts on those trees. We deal with investigations, which is why we're all here tonight to talk about, and we deal with tree planting. Our particular focus is not around the CDC environment. It's typically unauthorised works outside the planning environment. Some of the controls that influence and guide what we do, primarily the State Environmental Planning Policy, the Biodiversity and Conservation SEP, is basically the empowering state environmental planning policy that enables us to create a tree and vegetation development control plan, which guides how we manage our trees in Ku-ring-gai. There are a number of different other pieces of legislation, Australian standards for pruning, Australian standards for trees on development sites, which Ian uses to control and create conditions to protect trees on development sites. And one of the other ones is the Biodiversity Conservation Act. That typically involves threatened species, and typically where we have threatened species, the Department of Planning and Environment are required to issue a threatened species licence. So we are involved partly in the process of approving threatened species, but the ultimate department that's responsible for that is the Department of Planning. Tree investigation. So this is one of our primary roles. Breaches, they can be divided into a number of different categories. Breaches of development application consent conditions, breaches of complying development, and breaches outside the planning environment. So when we talk about that, it's typically when somebody deliberately or inadvertently chops a tree down or poisons a tree, but outside of the development environment. Some of the limitations that we have with regard to investigations is burden of proof. It's a criminal offence and therefore requires a beyond reasonable doubt proof. So you can understand that there are some challenges in that space with regard to linking offenders to an offence. So for us to be able to issue penalty infringement notices, we need to be able to have evidence that ties the offender to the offence. And there are challenges in that space. It's not to say that we don't have our successes, but there are challenges. Some of those threats and challenges to our urban forest are directly through unauthorised work, damage to trees, particularly in the complying development space, and exemptions from specific legislation. Ian mentioned one of those previously, the 1050. Often people utilise that to remove healthy trees under the guise of bushfire threat. So that is a challenging issue with regard to misuse, I suppose you could say. There's another challenge has been the way that unauthorised works has evolved, and it's moved from the traditional cutting trees down where we could catch them in the act. Sometimes during the course of those works, which gave us the opportunity to stop that work happening and being able to save the tree with some remedial work. It's now sort of moved to a memo of poisoning. Poisoning's a silent assassin. So by the time we become aware of it, the action has taken place and the tree's showing signs of toxic shock with dead leaves on it. And that's the first thing we become aware of it. So you can probably understand some of the challenges around trying to deal with that type of issue. What we're doing, yes, we have a compliance component that we utilise to try and manage this. We issue more fines than, we're one of the highest issuer of fines amongst councils, obviously because we have quite a large urban forest. We also deal with appeals to our decisions, and typically they're upheld, which shows that we have very strong, consistent approaches to the way that we make our decisions, and that they can stand up to legal argument when we're defending our positions. So we are very strong in that space. But one of the primary approaches that we utilise to combat this evil is really education. Some of the things that we've done is educating contractors, so targeting peak bodies, making them aware of some of the misinformation that they're putting on their websites, sending out brochures, trying to educate ratepayers about who they should be using when they're employing contractors. Online videos about the importance of tree preservation. So there are a few of the things that we're doing. As David mentioned earlier, we've developed an online mapping tool to assist people in understanding what we've approved, and so that they can call us as quickly. Times sometimes important for us to get to if someone's cutting a tree down, then we can get out there and stop that. We've also implemented an advertising of the permit to try and give people the appreciation of what has been approved. I mean, obviously you don't know everything because there are exempted works, but we're trying to give you the capacity to understand what has been approved within the limitations that we have. We've obviously implemented an urban strategy, which Fleur will talk about following my presentation. And one of the important things I think that we've just about to implement is our hotline for reporting illegal activities. And we're also dedicating a resource that will help us and build on the existing capacity that we have. So we'll have another officer, which you might be aware of, that's being advertised at the moment, for a tree investigations officer. So we're building on the existing capacity to try and respond to this growing problem. So that is me. I'll introduce Fleur now for her part of the presentation, but she'll be primarily dealing with education and some of the initiatives that we've been doing.
So my name's Fleur Rees and I'm the Senior Landscape Architect in the Urban Design team, which is part of the Strategy and Environment Department. First of all, I'd just like to make an acknowledgement of country to the Darramurrugal people. So for a bit of context, my role has been facilitating the development and the implementation of our urban forest strategy. So that's what my presentation will be focusing on tonight. Particularly, I'm going to look at how does council understand the urban forest, also what council's doing to support the urban forest, and also how we're helping to educate the community, and those two have a lot of crossover. So in terms of how we understand the urban forest, we went through a rigorous process of data capture and analysis as part of the urban forest strategy. So this included development of the strategy with an external consultant who were Arbor Carbon and Gwilym Griffiths, who are well-regarded professionals in this space. Our strategy has a vision statement to recognise that the urban forest forms an important cultural identity of Ku-ring-gai, where residents value trees and the natural landscape. Our main aim is to preserve, protect and enhance the urban forest and this unique character so that the established canopy cover is preserved and improved for future generations. And just to highlight the key strategic principles of the strategy, they are retain and protect, expand and integrate, monitor and maintain, and collaborate and incentivise. So that fourth key principle I'll go into further detail later in the presentation. But just in terms of some of the data that we have at hand to help us understand our urban forest, we have a tree inventory which locates all of the trees that we have within Ku-ring-gai, and these are geo-referenced and available internally as a data set for us. This has also mapped out whether those trees occur on public or private land, and there's just some statistics on the numbers in terms of the 2020 data that we had. Over 280,000 trees within Ku-ring-gai, close to 65,000 of those on public land, so managed by council, but quite clearly the majority are on private land. So that's, just to clarify, urban canopy, so that's not inclusive of trees on nature reserves and in national parks. So as part of the data capture, we also examined available planting spaces. So this allows us to have a better understanding of our capacity of where we can plant trees on public land. Sorry, getting back here on this one. Nope, doesn't matter. I'll move on. So what are we doing to support the urban forest? Fundamental to developing the strategy was establishing a working group, and this was from across teams and departments in council. This working group has been maintained, and we meet on a quarterly basis to go over what our achievements are, what everybody's working on, and next steps. As part of the process, we identified the challenges that we're facing across all the different departments, and we also highlighted what's working well. We set ambitious targets with our urban forest strategy, with the overall target of increasing our canopy in urban areas from 45% up to 49%. In terms of the data analysis, we understand and acknowledge that there's only so much that we can do on public land, and that a large proportion of achieving our target is going to be planting new trees on private land. So our action and implementation plan was another facet of the strategy, and this has a number of actions which we are in the process of implementing in order to enhance our urban forest. Another avenue for increasing biodiversity within council is biobanking. So we have 2 biodiversity stewardship agreements, and we receive funding from Biodiversity Conservation Trust to ensure that these areas which have at threat biodiversity can be maintained. And the 2 locations are Sheldon Forest to Roath Park, and there's also a selection of, I think, 5 other sites which are located around the LGA. So National Tree Day is another great initiative where plants are supplied from the community nursery, and planting days are facilitated by the environment team staff in public reserves. So again, the community nursery does a great job of propagating trees and shrubs to supply a number of council-initiated programs, and there's just some figures up there about, you know, the scale of what they do. There's a lot of hard work goes into that. So one of the first implementation projects of the urban forest strategy is the street tree planting pilot project, which is happening in Roseville at the moment, which some of you might be aware of. So the first phase of this was community engagement, and where we had a mail out to Roseville residents, and we had a good response rate for this. So there was 170 responses in either hard copy or online survey responses. Following a rigorous assessment of what the final locations could be, we've identified 42 locations for street tree planting, and this will be occurring in the upcoming months. There'll also be a follow-up of community engagement for this project, which is still being finalised, but it will likely include a community event and also a workshop about tree maintenance and some giveaways as well. Tiny Forest is another project where we're helping to increase biodiversity. This will be happening on West Pymble Village Green. There'll be an area of approximately 200 square metres planted out with trees and shrubs. This will also be the opportunity for amenities. There will be seating and signage, and it's helping to facilitate people's understanding of biodiversity in the community. So clearly our community cares about trees, and we have a number of volunteer groups, and I won't go through all of them, but I note that there's a number of our wonderful volunteers in the audience tonight, so thank you for coming. And I'll briefly touch on specifically some of our other education programs. So the Tree Tag project is the Killia Tree Trail. So this is a opportunity for the community to learn about trees on a trail. So there's been a select number of trees, I think 18 in total, throughout Gordon and Killara, and they will have a tag placed on them. And they will tell people exactly what sort of environmental impact these trees have. So, for example, one tree says, I produce enough oxygen each year as 262 people breathe each day. We also have a well-established Smart Schools program where community educators go out to schools and help facilitate different programs for children to learn about biodiversity and stewardship as well. There's a number of those programs listed there, but there's also the Bee Hotel program as well for schools, and in addition to that we've also got quite a successful natives beehive program as well for residents. And finally, just touching briefly on communications and engagement before I hand over to Virginia to elaborate on it, but we have an urban forest webpage on Council's website, and we also participate in a number of presentations for various interest groups, and also a part of communities of practice with New South Wales government departments as well. So we go to different events and share knowledge and build networks to help enhance our biodiversity objectives. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Floyd. I don't really need to talk about this very much. You can see we do communications on trees. We do it through various departments. But we also ran a bus shelter campaign. We do it in the rates notice. We do brochures in different languages. We're trying to be as inclusive as possible in getting the message out there. So you notice over the air bridge there at Gordon, got a big poster. So we'll keep running those campaigns every 6 months, and we'll keep developing them as well. So I note that in many of your comments that you wrote to us, you're very interested in what campaigns we did and wanted to let us know what you thought were good. So I hope some of them that you've seen tonight are on your radar. I noted one said, get to the kids first, and that's really obviously great. So we're doing that through our Smarter Schools program. So we want to do that continual education from children right to, people in their 90s, always interested in what goes on with trees. So now it's over to you. So we're going to, I've got Lauren here too, we're going to run the rooms. So I'll have a microphone and Lauren will have a microphone, and I'll do the front and she'll do the back. I'll do one from the front, we'll do one from the back. We have a whole panel of people, staff here to answer your questions. So a lot of them are down the back. They may want to come up when we start the questions. So we've got, till 8 o'clock. I would like to start at so we've got a solid hour for questions and answers. We mightn't need that. So I would like the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes even that you can help us. Give us your ideas about what we can do better. What do you know somewhere else that works better? We're really interested in that, because this is not just about what we do. If you want, and we know that people in Ku-ring-gai are passionate about trees. So if it's legal and it's within our budget, we're more than happy to hear what you've got to say to help us as well. Okay, thank you. So we'll start on the Q&As. Okay, here we go. So Lauren's going to go down there and I'm going to go over here, and I will... Yes, and could you introduce yourselves if you want to? If there's a privacy issue, I don't feel that people need to, so... Yes, okay. Yes, you.
Oh, me? Oh,
yes.
Right, thanks.
You understand?
Oh,
yes.
Hi, my name's Carolyn. I have quite a few questions, but I'll try and keep to just a couple. I'm not going to ask them all now. With the first speaker talking about the exempt and complying developments, I'm just wondering if threatened species of wildlife are identified in any of those trees. Does that have any influence on whether the tree can still be removed or not? Thank you.
Yes, it does. Where there are threatened communities that might occur on a site, we'll be aware of that. We have an ecological assessment officer that will assesses the sites individually. We will require those areas to be retained, and if there are threatened species likely to be on a site, then we'll require a report by an ecologist for the applicant to identify what's likely to be there, when we'll ground truth and see whether we agree with that. We also, if a tree was coming out, say there was a dead tree with a hollow in it, we would require that tree be looked at and to see whether there's any nesting potential, and also conditions. If the tree was coming out during, as part of a development, there would be conditions that there would be an ecologist doing, looking at the hollow and making sure that if there was anything that turned up, which could be just a common possum, for example, like a ringtail, then that possum would have to be relocated to the required standards. So all those things are considered. Some of these sites are also mapped under state government legislation, biodiversity values mapping. There's requirements for other levels of reports on if there's impacts in those areas, even if there wasn't any vegetation particularly, but there's something you're going into those areas. So there's various layers that, we're considering. There was a site recently that was a subdivision site which had an endangered fungus on it, and it became an issue. So you never know. And sometimes, some of these sites will have species which don't flower, like, say, orchids, certain ground orchids that only flower in certain times. So where our ecologists may require that, that there be verification during a flowering season, because you can't tell otherwise. So it's quite complicated, but yes, we're certainly looking at all those issues as well as we possibly can. Thank you.
And can I just say, because a lot of people will ask questions, we will just take one from each person until we've run out, then we'll come back again if that's okay.
Thank you. My name is Scott Hawker. I live in Pymble Avenue. I was concerned with the fines, the ongoing fines for illegal removal of trees on a development site. There's been no change, and I think the pinprick fine and the requirement to plant another tree to replace one that's been illegally removed is just a pinprick for a developer. It's the owner. You talk about the owner's responsibility to keep the tree to maturity. Whoops, I've trodden on it, sorry. It's the pinprick of a $3,000 fine should really be $50,000 or $100,000 for removal of a tree. Was there not scope to make that more severe? The developer, the builder, moves on to another site and does the same thing again.
We don't disagree. Unfortunately, the fines are set by the state government, they're not set by council. If council was setting the fines, I guarantee you they wouldn't be what they are now. Council has an outstanding resolution on the books which is basically lobbying the state government to address this issue and to actually change the upward limit of the fines as they stand at the moment.
Thanks for that. So I know that what we're going to do is there's people over here that I saw first, so then we'll come round. I know that you might have continuing questions on one topic, but I'm just going to try and be fair. Was it you? Sorry.
Come on, make a decision.
Come on.
Okay. Hi, I'm Alison. I live in Albert Drive, Kalara, in a flame zone in the bushfires. But we have trees. And I worked here for 28 years as the landscape architect, and I've planted thousands of trees in this local government area. But it's not just me, it's what everyone who works here wants to do. What I wanted to ask was, when a property is demolished, there is no compliance issues that they're required to follow. So they're able to demolish with no silt fences, no tree protection fences. They just bulldoze from beginning to end. And there's nothing that covers I can ring all the compliance officers in the universe, but they can't do anything because there's no requirements for anyone to put anything until the DA does. And I was asked by the last man I yelled at if perhaps didn't I have something better to do, and I said, no, I'm retired, I'm just going to sit out the front of your property and watch it for the next 6 months, because why can't we do something for demolition stage to actually protect trees? Question.
There are varying provisions in relation to demolishing a house. Some demolitions are permissible with a complying development certificate. And under that complying development certificate, it really is the state government that sets out what the requirements are. Council has no involvement in that. That's unfortunate, but it is what it is. In other cases, demolition requires development consent. And where demolition requires development consent, Council is involved, and Council does include conditions that relate to all the relevant measures that should be applied, precautionary measures in relation to protecting trees, in relation to sedimentation, in relation to any of the externalities that may result from that the demolition process.
Michael, Greg Dring from Linfield, just down the back here. I just wanted to address you or others that might choose to answer the question. What's the council's appetite to actually go to court and prosecute? We had a real live example in Linfield a couple of weeks ago. A couple 100-foot gums went down. I've got the video on my phone. I've communicated with your office. It's a slam dunk. It's all there. My understanding is that, notwithstanding incredible evidence, video, stat decks, witnesses, that probably won't end up in court. So my question is, if you don't prosecute a real brazen, premeditated, evidence-supported case like that, to the point made earlier, you're just going to have developers going, I'm just going to allow for costs of reimbursing my tree lopper, I'll give him a performance bonus because he'll probably have to close his company down, and I'll facilitate a subdivision of 3 lots rather than 2, and with the developers drop 35%, it's great. You're actually creating a pathway or a template for future activity unless you stomp on it in some more authoritative manner. Now, I want to congratulate you on your activities. I don't want to sound disparaging, but they're just my experiences and observation. And one other question. The trees...
One question,
okay,
sorry.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask our corporate lawyer to answer that question.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Jamie Taylor. I'm the corporate lawyer at the council. In relation to this question, I would say that council does have quite a substantial appetite for prosecution, and there is actually quite a lot of prosecution activity going under the auspices of council, both in the tree removal area and generally. Bringing any prosecution, council has to act properly. We can't engage in prosecutorial misconduct, which means that we do need to have sufficient evidence to prove an offence beyond reasonable doubt before a court to take that action. And as alluded to in the presentations, that is quite a high standard. Like, it's not a matter of us being quite sure of an offence. We need to be able to exclude any hypothesis of innocence. In cases of tree removal, that is often quite difficult, even though we might have quite a lot of information as to what occurred. There's substantial expense involved in running an appeal, so a prosecution, so we do need to be mindful of having good prospects when we do engage in a prosecution. In relation to incentives, I would say that the tree planting orders that we're rolling out currently do address the incentive to some extent, because if a tree is replaced, that might thwart the development objectives that were, that had led to the removal of the tree. So if it's more widely known that that's a possible outcome, that might act as a disincentive.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that. Would you mind passing that down? Thank you.
Thank you. Edward Tyne from East Killara. Thank you very much, Ian and Mike and Greg and Fleur. That was a really good presentations. Really urge the council to give these sort of presentations about critical issues at least once a year. And the Mayor does a great job in his newsletter that comes out. It'd be really helpful to have the latest information on that, on how we can find out information about clearing of trees. I want to just follow up on the comment that the lady in front of me made about clear felling of trees and vegetation in developments boundary to boundary. I also want to say that's also accompanied by massive disturbance of the soil profile, which is a biodiversity in its own right, and often very extensive excavations almost to the boundaries with the adjacent properties, which has a real impact on groundwater flow, sufficient groundwater flow in the adjacent properties and the property where there's massive excavation ready for a new build. There's really a lot more to this whole issue of the safety and security of our biodiversity, the well-being of trees. It's also about looking after the soil profiles and also the impacts on adjacent properties, which seems to have fallen off the issue around approvals processes. So perhaps you can respond to that.
Thank you. Who would like to respond to that? Sorry, having a discussion? There you go.
Hi everybody, my name is Jeff Bird. I'm the Senior Landscape Assessment Officer here at Ku-ring-gai. With regards to neighbours' trees and so on, when there's a development application, we certainly do look at what trees are on boundaries, we look at what their root zone would be, we look at what the impact will be with regards to excavation, services, and obviously the building footprint. We do look at the soil profile in the sense that we try to minimise the excavation around the trees.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so one from over here. Oh, sorry. It's not my turn. Sorry. Next.
Hi, I come from Turramurra, and my question's about the 10-metre rule. It just seems to be a little bit floppy. When I did my rebuild of my home, there's a very large scribbly gum just on the other side of the boundary of where I lived, and I had a $10,000 bounty not to put my driveway sealed concrete where that was so that it could get water, and I agreed with that absolutely. And yet, because it was within 10 metres, the neighbours, they said that they had got two experts to come and look at the tree, and they said it wasn't well. But they chopped the whole tree down, and it could have, I don't know. What I'd ask is it possible that we could have some greater strength around the 10-metre law, that at least the council person has to come along and also agree that the tree can be chopped down within 10 metres, because it just seems a bit floppy by now at the moment.
I think you might be referring to the 1050 rule, is that right? So council doesn't actually manage the 1050. That's state government, so the RFS. So we often get calls about the 1050. Our focus in that space is whether or not that work is complying with it. So if we get out there and we find that the tree is within those exemption criteria, there is absolutely nothing that we can do to stop the removal of a healthy tree. And I think that needs to be understood, that we can't do anything with regard to stopping that tree removal because it's an exemption that's beyond our control. So if it's not compliant, then it would be followed up as an unauthorised tree work. Yeah, so that's the limitation that we have with the 1050, and it can be frustrating, and I understand the frustration that exists out there around it, and it is a shared one, I can assure you.
Hi, I'm Kerry from St Ives. Just wanted to say thank you to the council for all the initiatives that you're running. It's very encouraging to see that you're doing a lot of the things that I think I already suggested in my registration. And this is probably a really tough question, but I'm just wondering if you've got any strategies in place to deal with the upcoming incredible challenge that we're going to face with the new housing policies. And can you clarify, like I hear that the minister's spruiking that councils are still going to have some controls, and yet we're hearing the opposite from council, like when we heard the experts speak about, you know, the loss of control. So I'm just wondering what the actual situation is. Like, will we still have these kinds of controls in place or not at all?
Okay, thank you. That's a really interesting question. So we're going to get two heavy hitters to answer it. Yeah, press.
Hi, my name's Andrew Watson. I'm Council's Director, Strategy and Environment. I think it's fair to say that the couple of policies that were announced late last year will be very challenging for lots of councils to deal with. We are yet to see the final detail of either of the policies, but we understand the one that particularly relates to transit-oriented development sites may in fact come into force sometime in the next couple of weeks. We don't for one moment accept the arguments that have been put about the non-refusal standards as they've been put in the policy, which is height and floor space. The whole idea of the policies are to provide extra housing. Now, if the council has a right to refuse housing based on unrelated or minor issues, the policy fails. So we would say that the standards of height and floor space will prevail over any other standard in council's LEP or DCP unless they're inconsistent. And in most cases, they're not going to be inconsistent. Because we don't know exactly what the development standards look like, particularly in the TODSEP, we really don't know how we can respond to that in development control plan provisions, for example. So we're going to very quickly, once the policy detail comes out, respond to those new dwelling typologies in our development control plan and put some controls around them if possible. It was alluded to in one of the earlier slides. Unfortunately, we've got a fairly high benchmark for tree canopy provision, and we're going from like something with a high 4 in front to something with a, in a single digit up to a 15% at most. So it will be challenging, and it will have a very marked effect. One thing we have started to think about, we've got to work out what are the most important policy responses we need to bring in at short notice, and it may be that something like a biodiversity offset scheme is something that we put in place in lieu of trees on site. Now that is not ideal. This council has in the past resisted offset policy because it effectively facilitates removal of a tree by paying a fine or a fee. We'd rather have the tree on the site. But when you take something like the dual occupancy provisions down to a couple 100 square metres each, you're not going to get large trees on a dual occupancy site, full stop. So we really don't know the exact nature of the problem. It will be a problem, and we will have to respond as quickly as possible. But we certainly don't accept any of the arguments that are being put about running through a merit assessment and coming up with a contrary, outcome than what the policy facilitates, which is provision of extra housing. Now, the staff, to their credit, will go through a merit assessment. It'll be doesn't apply, doesn't apply, doesn't apply, doesn't apply, or can't apply, can't apply, can't apply. I think I've answered the questions.
Yeah. Yes, so also Michael will add to that.
I just want to follow up on what Andrew was saying. What we're dealing with here in these non-refusal development standards is something that is a first. Certainly in planning in New South Wales, they're unheard of. And what they purport to do basically is to take precedent, utter precedent over all other controls, which is unprecedented. Given that, I think a lot of those initial decisions may be the subject of review in the Land and Environment Court to determine what the authority is behind these so-called non-refusal standards. Up until now, we've had something that's sort of related called non-discretionary standards, but they never ever went as far as these standards went. And basically what they were all about is if something was compliant with a height limit, well, you couldn't refuse it on the basis of it being too high, which sort of stands to reason. But this is an entirely different ballgame.
Michael?
Hi, my name's Ian from Warrawee. I'm quite saddened tonight. I thought we'd be coming to something that would be a little bit more constructive about helping to stop trees being decimated in the area. What I've heard is it's very, very difficult to do because of the costs, etc. It seems to me that new residents coming into an area can afford financially in buying a new house to poison trees and pay a minimal fine. So until fines are real, which are 50 to 100,000, education will not work. So I find it quite lame that we're going to blame the New South Wales government and then we're going to lobby them. I don't believe the New South government would resist putting up fines to a reasonable level, so I'll leave that. My question, though, is if you can't do anything with financials, you can presumably do something about constructive about replanting. And it seems to me, I've reported a tree recently in Cherry Street, which is 150 metres tall, frequented by unbelievable bird life, dead. Bird life's gone. New resident, somehow poisoned. Pretty obvious. Right? He's going to get away scot-free. Why don't we make residents who have trees poisoned when they get felled have to replace them with a minimum of 3 mature trees in exactly the same space?
Thanks for that.
Thank you for the question. I think the answer lies in the presentation that I gave earlier on. We're now embarking on a new way of dealing with this issue. It's still early days and we're learning from our experience. We've had 4 instances thus far where we've had to issue tree replacement orders. None of them have been appealed. And so the basis upon which we determine what goes to replace trees that have been removed and how many trees are required to be replaced, that's a matter for the experts within council to determine on a case-by-case basis, and it may well be in some circumstances that we may require more trees to replace what's been removed simply because the circumstances require it.
Cool. Sorry, I'm just going here.
Hi, I'm Jill. I live in Warrawee. Ausgrid's been busy in my area recently doing their usual decimation of trees to keep the power lines a long way away from the vegetation. Just wondering if there's the council can, if there can be more measures put in place to perhaps when a house is demolished and rebuilt, that the power lines have to go underground into the house rather than going through the front yard, and then the trees have to be that can be replanted have to be adjusted because to keep away from the new location of power lines.
Yeah. So I can talk about outside of the development space. So under the Electrical Supply Act, Ausgrid can supersede any of our tree DCP. So if they feel that a tree is a threat to their network, they can override any of our tree DCPs. We try to engage with them and work with them and understand when they're coming into the area so that we can talk about specific areas that need to be considered. And when there is over pruning that we become aware of, we will talk to them about that and try to rein in some of those aggressive approaches. It's a collaborative approach with Ausgrid because they can read us the riot act in reality. So we've tried to develop relationships with Ausgrid to try and ensure that we get the best outcomes when they come in and start pruning. So we'll make them aware of heritage conservation areas. We'll make them aware of specific sites that they have previously over-pruned. We will be in dialogue with ministers when they come to talk to us about over-pruning. And there have been occasions where they've been stood down. So Lawn Avenue is an example. Back in 2016-17, Ausgrid contractors were stood down because of the efforts that we took to deal with the over-pruning that was taking place. In terms of managing and conditioning appropriate developmental controls, one of the planners might be able to have a chat to you about considering that space, but typically in terms of routine maintenance, we're very onto that, and it's something that we're regularly managing with them to try and ensure that we're not getting over pruning. Because at the end of the day, Ausgrid's pruning is a functional pruning. It's not pruning to a standard. It's basically ensuring safe supply of electricity. So depending on the type of voltage that we're dealing with, it could be low voltage, high voltage, the clearances are different. So as you start getting up the scale in high voltage from 11 kV to 33 kV to 66 kV, the clearances start to become bigger and bigger because the high voltages can arc. So there's planning that's involved with tree planting. We're aware of some of the constraints that they impose on us with tree planting around their network. When Fleur is out there working on our planting program, our pilot program in Roseville, they're some of the things that she's looking at in terms of risk mitigation for future planting and reducing the impacts that could occur from those plantings that we're doing. Our aim is to have a suitable tree for the location, so the network is something that we consider.
Thank you.
So yeah, the planning side, one of the planners might be able to talk to you about that. We can take that offline if you like.
Okay, sorry. So can everyone just put up their hands who still wants to ask a question? Wow. Okay, so I'm very conscious that we do want to have 15 minutes at the end where we have some constructive ideas from you about what we can do better. So we've still got half an hour, so we should probably be able to try and get through it. So I'm going to take this lady over here who's had her hand up right from the get-go, and then I'll come back. Oh, sorry, but it's from the back. So I'll come back to you in a minute.
Hi, Sue from Turramurra. Thank you for the information tonight and the updates on what you are doing as initiatives. My observation would be is a lot of the initiatives are after the horse is bolted. I do recognise that council's hands are tied, but as a community, the thing that I'd like to understand is you've said a tree preservation order can't be overridden. Does that mean at the time of sale, if we put covenants on our properties, could we protect our trees as individuals from the next person taking them down? Is there anything we can do along those lines as a community?
I'll try to answer that question, but I think it might end up with our corporate lawyer. In terms of the tree replacement order process, the obligation is placed on the owner of the property at the time, and that responsibility then transfers to the subsequent owner of that property. I don't know that an individual can then obligate a future owner, an individual owner of a property can obligate a future owner to comply with that order or anything else relating to the preservation of the tree if it's not consistent with the order. And if it's consistent with the order, then the order does the job itself.
Thank you for your question. This is a fairly complex area legally, but in terms of giving you a general answer, that sort of restriction is generally going to be problematic. The reason for that is the planning instruments that the state government puts together will usually contain a suspension of covenants clause, which basically, even though that these restrictions might be in place on the titles of properties, they're not enforceable, and they can't be given determinative weight in determining a development application. So even though the idea is quite attractive, in practical terms in most cases, it's not going to make a difference to the outcome.
Sorry, thanks, but that was 2 questions, so okay, so I have this lady here.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Fleur, for your presentation. I'm Barbara Newman, and I live in Campbell Drive, Wahroonga, and one of the questions that I've got is that since we have lost 45% of our tree canopy in the last 10 years, I wonder why Campbell Drive is not on as a priority for replanting.
Hopefully I can answer that, but I guess Roseville was chosen as the pilot project because in terms of, I missed that slide unfortunately, sorry I skipped over it, but in terms of our canopy cover across different suburbs, Roseville has our lowest canopy cover, so that was why it was selected as the area for the pilot project. Absolutely.
Well, I just, Jean-Paul Descoeur from Gordon, I just wanted to come back to Osgrid, because as I put in on my registration form, I'm always wondering, are we ever going to see electrical cables underground? They are the biggest threat to our trees.
That is a challenging issue because the undergrounding of power would essentially impact existing streetscapes. So there's whether or not there's existing space under the nature strips to accommodate those as well could be challenging. Certainly, I'd imagine in new development areas. I live in an area in Ku-ring-gai that's been undergrounded, so there is an awareness around that and the impacts that has on Ausgrid's network. And from Ausgrid's perspective, it's about uninterrupted power supply. So their focus is around they monitor their network, and where there are incidents on their network, they can attribute it to a variety of different factors. Trees are just one of them. And so they will explore alternatives where they can put in aerial bundle cable to reduce the airspace of low voltage conductors so that there's less likelihood of tree impacts on their network. So there's a number of different alternatives that are available to try and manage the threat to trees, because the threat to trees comes from power line pruning too, because that ongoing pruning does impact health and structure of trees. And when you're managing a network and trees around that network, and trees need leaves to be able to function, and you're removing that leaf volume on a regular basis, that impacts the longevity of those trees as well. So they're susceptible to disease and impacts on structure. So there's a lot of things to think about with that, and it's not as easy as just saying underground, because it's very expensive to underground the entire network as well. But yeah, look, there are opportunities to do that in certain circumstances.
Thanks.
Yeah, I did talk about aerial bundle cable. So yeah, for those that don't understand aerial bundle cable, it's basically creating the 4 bare conductors that you see in the street to one big piece of licorice that's insulated, and it reduces the airspace that is required to prune around it. and it also reduces the likelihood of an outage because it's insulated, and if branches touch it, it's not as big an issue.
Thanks, Greg. No, you're on.
I've got two comments, not so much a question, but two comments, and I think a few people here are going to know exactly what I'm going to say. First comment is on illegal tree felling. I think it is a major problem, and I don't think it's ever going to be cured, because even with education doesn't work on a lot of things. Road deaths, for instance, they're higher now than they've ever been, but we're all told to drive safely. Knocking a tree down, no matter what the fine is, whether it could be $3,000, and that goes for however many trees they knock down, it could be 1 or 300. People that are going to build a mini mansion, especially in places like Turramurra where I live, if they want a tree down, they'll knock it down, and they'll absorb that knocking down cost, even if they get a fine, in the building cost. I mean, we've got a house in my street which has just gone up. It's been empty since November. The developer bought it for about $3 million. He's built this monstrosity on the corner of my street and another street. It's a big white slab of concrete with windows, the most stupidly designed place whatsoever. It's got a swimming pool with about 150 lights around the house, which is, I'm almost tempted to ring up the airport and say, no, don't mistake it for another runway. And this developer wants to sell this house for $7 million. And this is a house that has replaced a previous house, which was accommodating a family of 5 people. So the house that they bought and knocked down was an adequate house. They put up this bloody monstrosity, so I have to look at it every day, and he's going to on-set it for $7 million, knocked all the trees down to do it, and he's going to go somewhere else and do that bloody thing again. So, and these houses that are going up are not helping the so-called housing shortage that we're suffering. And next question is, the knockdown rebuilds in my area are becoming quite prolific. I've got a street with about 24 houses, and since 2014, half of those houses, which is 12, 13 houses, have been converted from convenient houses to mini mansions, which I call ego homes, because these homes going up are not relevant to families of today with 2 kids. 5 bedrooms, 2 stories, a garage. And a lot of these garages, the Mercedes are outside on the street, and the garage is full of crap anyway. So, you know, what I'm saying is, and I've just got a section, I won't be too long, I've been contacting the ministers of this government, the Labor government, and the previous government, including Premier Perrottet and Premier Minns and other ministers, and 9 times out of 10, I don't get a response. All I get is, thanks for your message, I'll call you later. And later never comes. Now, I've just had a recent response from Scully, Paul Scully, who calls himself a minister. It wasn't from him, it was from his office. It says here, from Scully's office, the New South Wales government has provided local councils with powers to protect important trees. So how do you find out what an important tree is? And would encourage engaging with Ku-ring-gai Council, as it is the authority best placed to address the concerns. Now, I think I've missed something, because all this talk that's happened tonight is all very nice, gives you a hairy chest and everything, but in reality, nothing is happening. And if you only just realise now that there's a problem with trees being felled illegally, and more so legally, then you're no place in being where you are.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Is there a question to be answered? Talk about multiple pins. Who's answering this question? Sorry? Oh, no, I thought he asked one question. Okay, I thought there was a question somewhere, so my apologies. Okay, sorry, I've got this man here has been waiting very patiently, but I've got Wamba in front.
Thanks, the previous gentleman, I think he raised the issue very well. My name is Raju, I live in Pimble. I'm a small guy, I doesn't understand too much technical thing. All I want to know from the council is, can somebody give me any anecdotal evidence where you guys have actually successfully prosecuted or fined people, A, and B, have you actually ever blacklisted any of these tree loper guys who keep on dropping leaflets into my letterbox each day, every day? They are not local. They come from other part of Sydney. They give rubbish reasons to people saying this tree is okay to be pulled down. I've got an email from council. I complained about 3 trees about 1.5 meters diameter, more than 6 meters tall in Verulam Avenue. Complained to council in December. I got a letter from Gai saying, I got an email saying council will pursue this matter, and sometimes it takes time. It may take 3 months, 6 months. This is what I got the email. I'm more than happy to share with everybody if time permits. Now, what is beyond reasonable doubt? A tree existed yesterday and it doesn't exist today. What is the reasonable doubt here? I have given photographs to council. I have sent the number plate of the truck which was pulling down the tree. What is beyond reasonable doubt? So, has council got a list of blacklisted tree fellers?
Yep.
Thank you.
So
Thank
that
you.
is a multi-layered question, and there's probably 3 parts to your question, which I'm happy to answer. The tree industry is an unregulated industry. So by unregulated, there is no governing body with licensing, and there is no control whatsoever about qualification or starting up a business to be a tree lopper, in inverted commas. We have tried to educate the general public about what to look out for and to be considered about who you engage when you're undertaking tree work because of this issue. And when you get unscrupulous operators who aren't licensed and who can't be held to account by a peak governing body and that they're unlicensed, you know, if you have a plumber or an electrician, there's some recourse if they're not abiding by certain approaches. With the tree industry, it's completely unregulated. So the approaches and things that we have to our advantage is trying to educate the general public, and we've tried to do that through rates notices, and we've done that. You've probably all received those in the rates notices about trying to understand about what questions you need to ask when you're engaging someone. Are they qualified? Do they have workers' compensation, and are they insured in case of an accident? You know, I've worked for councils that have had, I've got a call on Friday afternoon where an old lady has engaged a contractor to do some tree work and put it straight through the house, and then those people disappear into the ether and can't be contacted. They're like phoenix companies. They rise up from the ashes with a new mobile phone number, and then they go on to the next victim. So it's not as easy and straightforward as regulating, because that is not something that can be done. The industry isn't regulated. With regard to your concerns about beyond reasonable doubt, that is a real challenge, and it exists. With regard to being able to tell you about what we can do, we're governed by freedom of information, and so if we're doing an investigation, we can't give you all of that information. There's rules that govern what information we can provide to you, and so we're limited with what we can give you. And that, if you're after that type of information, there's an informal application that you need to lodge to get all that information, and there's retracted and redacted information that's provided as part of that, because we're limited with what we can give you. We will follow up, issue PINs, initiate proceedings where we have the evidence to do so, and it is challenging. So the information that you've been provided with, sir, is just an overview that the timeline isn't set. We've got a 2-year window to follow up on these issues, so a statute of limitations. So it could take 2 years to follow up. If we got a little bit of information 12 months later that allows us to, you know, we get a video or something of someone applying it and it's date stamped, we might have the capacity to start to move that issue forward. So it's a very challenging space that we're working in, but we're doing everything we can. And the issue that you've raised, you're more than welcome to look at that when we've completed the investigation. You can lodge your informal request for information, and all the information that you're after can be provided to you. But there is a formal approach to that.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So I've got this man here, then Christian, and then that man there in the pale blue shirt.
Derek's the name. I've heard a lot tonight, about trees, and we're all here because we all love trees. However, I've heard so much about penalties, increased penalties, and all these things to persecute people who've already got the trees. What I'm concerned about is what incentives are there for people to plant new trees, not preservation of the old trees. If you had a geranium preservation order in which you need council permission to cut down or prune a geranium to encourage people to have geraniums, what would happen? They wouldn't plant them. Now, some of you may remember the big tornado that came through St Ives, Pymble, Warrawee, all these areas in about 1991. Now, a lot of trees were destroyed, including in our area, and what I noticed in our area, and probably in a lot of other areas too, no one planted trees again. What they did, they planted camellias, they planted azaleas, things that you didn't need council approval for. So what there should be some lateral thinking. Instead of trying to persecute everyone who's planting trees and developers, that's fine, but what do we do in order to encourage people to plant new trees? The Tree Preservation Order, curiously, achieves the reverse of what's intended. It doesn't encourage people to plant trees, which it should be. And what should happen, if someone plants a tree, they should have the right to pull that tree down. It may be too close, it may be an inappropriate tree, it may drop leaves on the neighbour's pool or whatever. But once you prevent people from planting trees and discouraging them, then all you're doing is trying to preserve old trees. Now, why can't council, for instance, do something themselves? And for instance, I've just parked this evening in the Gordon car park. Now, there's no shade trees there at all. At St Ives Shopping Centre, there's no shade trees. So why can't council plant some shade trees and encourage people to plant trees in their own gardens? And it can only be done if they know they can remove them.
Thank you. I know that was part comment and part question, but do you want the question answered about the shade trees? Okay. Who's going to answer the question about the shade trees? Planting Fleur?
Thank you for that question. So incentivising tree planting is definitely one of our key actions as part of the urban forest strategy. So we're currently working through ways that we can facilitate that, because I think fundamentally it does come back to planting the right tree in the right location, and that needs to be accompanied with an education program. So we're early days yet, but it's definitely something that we're looking towards, and hopefully we can support that with the community nursery. Don't want to jump in there too soon, Jacob, but it's definitely something that we're looking at.
Christiane, I live in St Ives. On a number of occasions, I've noticed illegal tree, well, what seemed like illegal tree works going on but it's always on a weekend. And every time I've rung the council number and go through reception, I have been told that rangers do not deal with tree removals on weekends. So I thought I'd let council know that. And on 2 occasions, the trucks that were actually pulling the mulches had no number plates on. I did ring the police, but they're not interested. So my question is, what can council do about this, or what are we meant to do about it in situations like that?
So rangers do attend on the weekends. We are building on our existing resources, I mentioned earlier in my presentation, with extra resources that are dedicated to tree investigations. So if you look, you can look in on Seek. There are positions advertised at the moment for those roles. We've also developed a specific hotline to report those, to help facilitate and provide you with a conduit for reporting those issues. We also have created a way that you can interrogate our website and discern whether or not an approval's been issued for that site. Now, in terms of the individuals that are undertaking this work, it's not surprising that they don't have registrations on their number plate, on their vehicles. There are criminals involved in these actions, and they're very unsavoury characters. We deal with them on a regular basis. And so my recommendation is don't approach them, to call council, because so as I said, we're just about to build on our existing resources to deal with these issues. So we're listening to what's going on, we're responding, and we're trying to make sure that we have a continuity of response with these issues. So
on the weekend.
On the weekend.
Yes, just to be clear about that.
During the week, we have officers that are able to deal with those issues.
Can I just say quickly?
No, I'm sorry, we've got questions still. So people have had their say. That's good.
Well, it's only gets out there. The tree's gone anyway.
Good evening, Paul Binstead from Linfield. Look, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to each of the council officers who are here and for the work that you do. And it's obvious to me that you actually all care about the natural environment and trees, and you know, people are upset, and sometimes the upset has been coming across as criticism of you, and that's not how it should be. We in the community should be wrapping our arms around you, thanking you for your work and supporting you in it. But it is obvious to me that the legal system is completely unfit for purpose. It's got your hands tied behind your back. The state government found the same thing with motor vehicles. Once you had to have a policeman pull you over and look at your face and look at your licence before you could be issued with a speeding fine. Now the owner has a rebuttable presumption that they were driving the car, which they can rebut by signing a statutory declaration. I suggest we need a landowner is rebuttally presumed to be liable for tree removal, and they can give a stat dec explaining the circumstances if they say it wasn't them, and then they're up for jail if they sign a false stat dec and that gets proven, as we've had people, including a former judge, for signing false stat decs about cars. This won't be easy, it'll need legislative change, but we as a community should support you in that. And there are other good ideas. I wouldn't quite say you can always chop them down, but I think there should be incentives for tree planting as well. But thank you for your work. It's important. I've spent almost my whole life in the LGA, and we're going through a genocide of our blue gums and blackbutts that's totally changing the character of the nation from murderers from other places with herbicides.
Thanks for that. So if we have no further questions, of people that have already asked questions, what I'd like... Oh, sorry.
Hello, I'm Max from Kalara. I've had the experience of 6 blue gums poisoned, and we've worked with the local community and Simon Leonard and Barbara Ward and previous mayor. And all I'd have to say is that the council is, as you said, done a lot of good work. The voters pay for good intentions, but we just don't get around to actually enforcing it. And I've never met you before, but I can say I'd like to see the law changed to a duty of care where I'm responsible for my trees, you're responsible for your trees, and it doesn't matter what happens, we can sell the properties, And the problem, I was impressed with the tree replacement order. I think that was a good step. It sounds like if we can get behind that and really push for the change to a duty of care, because that's how OH&S changed. It went from, instead of individuals, it went to a duty of care. We've had mine managers responsible for the duty of care for everything on their mine. Ships captains have a duty of care. We as residents need to have a duty of care. And I would like to support the council to just change the game. We can't stick with the same. It frustrates the shit out of us.
Thanks for that. Just before you start, that's fine. It's really good because I think we're moving into the last part anyway, where everyone's giving us some ideas about what they think for the future. So we'll sort of keep going that way. We'll put the questions in. We've only got 15 minutes. We've got cupcakes for you for thanking you for coming. So I'm sure that you want to finish at 8, right? So we'll go to the next question here.
Thank you. And in the spirit of the transition from questions to ideas, this is one of each. Thank you, Council, for giving us the opportunity to chat with you this evening. My name's Mark Bray and I live in Pymble. With reference to the gentleman's comments before about large houses necessitating the removal of trees, could Council change the floor space ratio for single dwellings? Yeah. I mean, question or idea, up to you. Thank you.
So that's fine. It's pretty easy.
Thank you for the question. The answer, I suppose the simple answer is yes, we could. But ultimately, the Department of Planning would be overseeing that process, and we're, as local government, we're answerable to state government. Given what the floor space ratios are across metropolitan Sydney, I think if council were to propose something that was out of step with that, I think we may have some answering to do to the state government. But yes, the simple answer is yes. Andrew, did you want to add anything to that?
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Mayor?
Right, so at the moment, in a lot of our R2 density zones, we have a maximum FSR of 0.3 to 1, so 30%. If you see those knockdown rebuilds, they've got a different set of rules from the state government, which is equivalent to 0.4 to 1. But in the future, what's being proposed for low and mid-rise is they will allow dual occupancies everywhere with a FSR of 0.65 to 1. So we're going from 0.3 to 1 to 0.65 to 1. What do you think that means for trees? And this is state government law that overrides any controls that we have at a local level.
Thank you.
Solutions now.
Yeah, so we're going to do that? Yes, please do.
Hi, my name's Chris Smallbone. I'm also chairman of Wild Things New South Wales. First of all, I thank the council. I think we're privileged. We've got a great council, in my opinion. And this headache, where's Solomon? I don't know where he is, right? Because it's so difficult. And the last 7 years as chairman, we had so many forums and everybody complains about the trees and what's been happening. And to find a solution, I actually find it very difficult, honestly. But I want to come, let's say, from the left field a bit, okay? We've heard the densities. Andrew's on about densities. The mayor just mentioned densities and so on, right? Once they start putting all these double densities, what we call it, trees are going to go and so on. So what is going to make people sit up in government? Now, I've been doing a lot of work with countries around the world, voluntary, on these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And there's 3 of them that are linked to an environment, whether it's land or the sea, climate change and all the rest of it. Now, everybody jumps on the council, zero emissions, everyone's on this climate change and everything else. But you don't hear much about it with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I don't hear about either Tanya Plibersek or the state governments. You don't hear about it. But the Australian government signed up to it. And there's reports every year, you can go on the website. We're supposed to be hitting targets and everything else. Now let me finish. I know all the answers on that, right? I'm trying to give a left field solution that you ought to put pressure on people. Now, Go to Western Sydney. I went to seminars 6 years ago after I retired. I was learning all about these things. They've devastated Western Sydney, haven't they? Go and have what I was looking 6 years ago. The Australian government should be ashamed of itself. Right? Seriously. Now, imagine if we start complaining, they call us NIMBYs because of what, the NIMBYs, those posh people up on the, got inside toilets and everything out on the North Shore, haven't they? You know what I mean? So, all NIMBYs. So, what we've got to do is, to me, is Tanya Plibersek has to be stood up and we've got to say, hold it, you guys are not doing your job. Look what you've done in Western Sydney, all those black roofs, all those houses next to each other, no room for trees. Go and look at the lease thing, all those developments. Now what are you going to do to Ku-ring-gai? You're going to take Ku-ring-gai with all this tree canopy, keeping temperatures down, keeping the fumes, the noise, all these things. Trees have great benefits. So what are we doing? We've got to start removing them all because we're bringing in 500,000 immigrants a year to come here on double density housing and so on. It's absolutely stupid. So I would like to see some way, and this is coming from the left field because the clowns, I'll call these politicians clowns, whether it's federal government or state government, don't even think about those things. It's just money, as you say, it's just money, all the rest of it. So I'd like to see the council be the first one leading that and say, listen, you're not shaming them. What that gentleman said over there, you've got to think of some way of encouraging them, and Tanya Plibersek must be the person because she has that responsibility for it all. So how would you link it in with Western Sydney, with Ku-ring-gai, keeping the temperature down? 20 years ago I drove up to Queensland. Oh, all the trees gone. Go to Townsville, the temperature there is about 3 degrees higher than it should be. Why they cut all the trees down? Right? And that's what's going to happen with us here. The more trees you cut down, up goes the temperature. So there's a lot of things that the council could be going at with the state government, with the federal government, to do something or come up with another way of challenging it. Because I don't see solutions for all the other problems. And one last thing, what the gentleman said there is dead right, he's gone now I think, but why doesn't the council give a rate benefit for everybody who's got a tree on their property? So every tree you got on a property, you cut the rate bill. That helps.
I think I saw that suggested quite a few times on the comments, actually, incentives. Oh, okay. So you're an incentive? Okay.
So thank you very much. Sabina from Wurunga, one of the migrants to Australia. So just want to say thank you, especially I think the lady, I don't know her name, for the initiative, Fleur, for starting planting trees. So I had a run-in with Greg Naka. I planted trees on my green strip and was told to remove them. They were all natives, and I had to remove them all. But I think the green strip is the biggest asset we have. It's council land. And if we could plant trees there, and if Fleur gives us a detailed on the map, says, okay, you can plant a tree here, it's got to be this, this, or this. And then I go, okay, on a Sunday, I'll buy this tree, I plant it, I look after it, I adopt it. As an incentive, countering the whole, what's happening. See, 100 years ago, the people in Wurunga just planted the trees on the green strip, didn't ask anyone, and they're now magnificent. So if we could get the allowance from council where we can plant them in our own time, on weekends, I would really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Now, someone that hasn't spoken. Is that you? You haven't spoken? Okay, good.
Peter and I'm from West Pymble. We've observed the tree canopy disappearing around us like everybody else has. And I'd just like to bring the sort of the grassroots perspective to it. From my experience talking to neighbours, tree removal often starts with a homeowner ringing somebody they've been recommended to or seen advertised in the letterbox, and someone turns up at their door who appears to know something about trees, and they say, what am I going to do about this? And they say, oh, it's within 3 metres, or it's on the list of exempted species, or whatever it is, and they do it, and they fly under the radar. Recently, we've got a block where we've been for 8 years, which had 15 trees on it, on a quarter-acre block, but it's in the turpentine ironbark designated area. We've added a lot more trees to that site since we've been there, so I'm in the firing line should I ever need to do anything about all those ones we've added. But we've added them for our amenity and we've taken the risk. But when it came to looking after our trees, and we've been looking after native trees for a long time, we've had a relationship with an arborist that goes back well over 30 years. And I want to get them out to maintain my trees and take out the dead wood and so on. But because of its location, we had to put in a formal application, which we did, and we had the work done. But when my neighbour across the road got people in to take down a large tree, which they were told they could do because of the 3-metre rule, I went across to them and said, here's the map, you're in a turpentine ironbark area, you can't touch any tree without approval. They were astonished because they'd been quoted the exempted species list. And the contractor who was there, who had trucks with names on the side, registration, all the rest of it, they purported to be unaware of Ku-ring-gai's detailed rules as well. So the work on the trees stopped and they all went away. It's the first time I've had a win with a tree removal. The thing that came home to me was that for me to go through the exercise, and I've had a professional role in the building industry all my career, it took me quite a while to put together an application. And just using the maps to find out whether we were in a protected environmental zone or not, because of the slow refreshing of the map online, and working out which map you have to look at, and reading the colour for the different zones, which doesn't match the index on the side. It's quite difficult. I gave my neighbour a printout of what I'd found that showed what he should know, but to cut the long story short, I would suggest that the tree controls, which have been drafted to cover all the legal requirements and everything, have become too complex. People who want to do that sort of thing, who might rely on a contractor who comes to their door, they need to have something in their hands that's got a map in the front that has the zones on it, that says yes, 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 yes. And I must admit, until a few years ago, I was relying on the list of vulnerable species.
Okay, thank you for that. Certainly, things on the website we'll look at and try and look at things to make it easier. Did anyone over here have an answer on that? Noting we have 5 minutes, everyone. 5 minutes. You haven't spoken before, have you? No. So, Greg, do you want to just quickly wrap anything like that up?
As I touched on earlier on, the industry's unregulated. So there are people out there that deliberately go and do illegal works, and they will supposedly educate their clients in the way of the world to do this work. We are aware of those MOs, and we are strategizing ways. There's ongoing ways that we're strategizing around that. We send out educational material to ratepayers, and we do all of that. But the challenge with the industry being unregulated is we can't go directly and capture all these individuals because they don't all operate under a governing body or a peak body. And so there are peak bodies out there, the Australian Tree Contractors Association, we target them. They're typically the scrupulous operators that work within the council area. But the unscrupulous operators, the door knockers, the people without insurances, the Phoenix companies that rise from the ashes after we catch them doing the wrong thing and start up under a new name with a new mobile phone number, they are a challenging element. And there's no one fix for all of that. But we're doing our best to try and recognise the challenges and try to address them.
Okay, thanks for that.
I'm David from Wurrunga. Firstly to thank council and also council officers very much again for your efforts and for having the night tonight. Most appreciated as a resident. Secondly, talking about the need to prove beyond reasonable doubt in relation to tree removal, I think nothing would upset a person putting a McMansion on their property than to have a sign go out the front to say trees have been illegally removed on this site. And I don't believe it would be necessary on public land to have any beyond reasonable doubt proof to do that. Council's entitled to put up signs wherever it wants. So that's the first thing, and I think that will get the message out pretty quickly. I guess that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Regarding the signage, that is something that we've looked into, and we are addressing that. It was not allowed as part of our DCP, but we now are addressing that. So we are looking at that signage of saying these trees, but we can't do it on private land. We can only intimate it that something happened, but we are looking at that. So yes, thank you for that idea. It's yes, okay. Yep, okay, so look, I'm happy to finish there if you all like. If there's a burning question that we haven't addressed, so from someone who I haven't spoken to. Look, the other thing, can I say this? So please write to us at if you don't, you can do call centre at krg.gov. Oh, I got it right. newsouthwales.gov.au. So call centre at KRG, and we'll those emails will come directly forward through to me, and then we'll any questions that we haven't answered, we'll put up on the website. As I said, like after we've got a lot of your responses and questions through registration, which we will put up on the website. This is being taped tonight, so it will be there. And we'll gather your ideas from that, and we will do that. And because we have your email addresses too, if you're registered, we will provide you information back from tonight as well. And yes, write to state government about the things that they control, absolutely. And also, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it to hear from you.
I think I should thank you.
I'd just like to thank you all for coming as well. Thank you to the Mayor and councillors. But in particular, I'd like to thank Virginia for pulling this all together. It was a lot of work to get all the staff to be aligned for tonight. And thank you also to the staff who spoke and answered questions tonight. I think you'd agree. That we're very fortunate to have them. They obviously have a lot of care and passion and a lot of great knowledge of the subject matter as well. So thank you all.
And please get a cupcake on your way out. Trees at the back. So if anyone wants to take a small sapling, please do.